Thank you. As Shrikant just mentioned, I am going to pull some themes out of Aesop's fable, number 203, The Frogs and the Well. If you have not read it, I will not even summarize it. I will just read it right now. It's only a short paragraph, and then we're going to go into multiple interpretations and analyses, and then finally we're going to wrap up the conversation with how is any of this relevant? How can we apply these things, apply these principles for self-development, as Shrikant mentioned. So the story or fable is as follows. Two frogs lived together in a marsh, but one hot summer, the marsh dried up and they left it to look for another place to live in, for frogs like damp places if they can get them. By and by, they came to a deep well, and one of them looked down into it and said to the other, this looks like a nice, cool place. Let us jump in and settle here. But the other, who had a wiser head on his shoulders, replied, not so fast, my friend. Supposing this well dried up like the marsh, how should we get out again? And the moral is summarized here in one sentence: think twice before you act. So I want to draw a parallel, or rather a schism, or like a chasm right between these two frogs, and look at them as the embodiments of particular attributes or archetypes. Okay, and this gap I'm going to drive through them is, I think, the most immediately obvious is logic versus emotion. So acting immediately based on immediate gratification, desires, weak emotions, or thinking things through, and as the story says, thinking twice before we speak. That's the most obvious one at the surface level. But what I want to do here today is talk about three attributes that are the natural successors to living life through these two lenses, logic or emotion, predominantly. Obviously, I don't want to polarize. I understand both are important. I don't want to stigmatize completely living through logic or completely living through emotion. With that said, we have three attributes that are tied to each lens here. So if we live through logic, we are going to eventually end up on, and we're going to go through these one by one, we're going to end up in faith, composure, and patience. That's the first frog. We'll attribute those results to the first frog. The second frog, living through his emotions, we will in succession explore fear, worry, and fluctuation. So that's the chasm that I want to draw between these two frogs. And instead of going back and forth from logic to emotion, from faith to fear, from composure to worry, etc., I want to completely draw the picture of the positive attributes and characteristics first. In other words, describe the first frog in detail. Obviously, we're going to anthropomorphize and look at practical real-world examples. And then I want to draw contrast with this for the second frog, and we'll go into depth on living through emotions, fear, worry, fluctuation, etc. So with that said, we have, obviously, like I said, the first frog with a wiser head on his shoulders, as the story says. He is living through logic. And if we as individuals live through logic, and what it means to live through logic is, I would say, primarily make your decisions based off of logic, based off of sound reasoning, based off of thinking things through. And this implies at least some awareness of our trajectory and our end result. Okay, so we know what we are looking for in terms of an outcome. And we know also, once we set this outcome, I think it's directly proportionate. The clarity of this outcome becomes proportionate to the clarity of the, I guess, nature of the actions we are going to take in front of us and our decisions. In short, we know exactly what is going to get us closer to this goal or further away from this goal. So therefore, we know what to say yes to, we know what to say no to, we know the types of books we should read, we know the types of people we should associate with, we know what information we should research, we know what to reflect, we know what to look for in our behavior, we know how to analyze our trajectory accordingly. This is all predicated on logic. And if we live through this, if we make enough decisions based on logic, it will manifest and crystallize as faith. So the second principle, faith. And it's having faith in a few things in particular here. First is, obviously, it could be the outcome. You could have a very strong faith in your outcome or your ability. And even if it's not in the outcome, for we all know that unprecedented circumstances can manifest themselves. We can run into unforeseen agents or opponents or obstacles that are in our way that we didn't conceptualize. That's all understandable. But we can still have faith in ourselves, in the sense of that we know we have the ability, the competence, the awareness to face this temporary defeat and to utilize failure in an important way. And an important metaphor we can use here is that of an autopilot, for example, in a plane. So I recently learned from a whole field of psychology called psycho-cybernetics that a plane, when it departs and lands, it's actually off course 90-something% of the time. Now this sounds weird, but if you look at it in terms of like micro level, you hit turbulence. You might coast with particular wind. You might go through clouds. You might go through different atmospheres or time zones, etc. All of these things can have a detrimental or deleterious effect on the direct route from, let's say, New York to California. Let's make it easy. Let's make it a long route. And you might say these differences are trivial. Okay, they're frivolous. They have no inherent value. It's not going to influence the output that much. And you might be right in the short term. And what I mean by this is, yes, these few inches, few feet that the nose of the plane is getting off course with a trajectory from turbulence, that might not matter in the short term, but extrapolate this. Manifest that 1 foot difference from New York all the way to California, and you're going to be literally miles apart. Okay, another easy analogy for this is to think of golfing. So, when you're golfing, you go and you set up your swing and you make sure you're facing the right direction. You make sure you take into account the wind, you take into account your position, you take into account the terrain, etc. And then you hit the ball and you hope to get it close to where your target was. And you realize that if you turned not even an inch, even let's say an eighth of an inch or a 16th of an inch, and you hit the ball, okay, it's going to be 50 or 100 or 200 yards further than your original desired target. So this minuscule change, it can extrapolate to significant, manifestations in the long term if we are not aware of these things. And having faith in yourself is being aware of this process, and it's using failure. It is using all of these little ticks, all of this turbulence, all of this turmoil, all of these tribulations as awareness, as indicators on what we are to bounce off of. So we can realize that success in any aspect of our life is not linear. Okay, it is exactly like this airplane, exactly like this game of golf, where you're hitting something and you might mess up. That's okay, but you are at least a little bit closer to that goal. So you are still moving forward. Again, this is predicated on you have the right attitude toward failure. That's a whole different topic in itself. But in short, both of those examples of the autopilot and the golf will elicit a faith in ourselves that we can realize we can use this feedback, we can use this data of what not to do. Again, Ben Franklin has the most famous quote, "I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work," when he was inventing the light bulb. I found 10,000 ways that didn't work. I think it's a very constructive and useful attitude to have toward temporary defeat. I don't even call things failures. I call things temporary defeats. If you have the right attitude, you always gain insight from them. So all of that represents faith in yourself and the outcome and the trajectory, and being aware and being humble, obviously, too, having the awareness to implement this feedback in here. So if we make decisions through logic and we have faith, this leads naturally to composure. So we realize that we are inevitably going to get knocked off course, just like this airplane being off course 90-something% of the time. And it has who knows, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands deviations from that original goal, but it always bounces back and recalibrates course. And that's exactly what we should do. Now, the frequency or the temporal scope of the duration of these failures might not be as quick or as short as this airplane example, because this might be happening every second. But it is nonetheless a perfectly exemplified metaphor. And with this awareness, it will bring composure. And I've always loved this metaphor for composure and for stillness and for reflection and for meditation. And that is the following: only still waters reflect. So you can look at this composure, you can look at this faith, this logic, this pausing of thinking things through, like the second frog did, thinking twice before you act. In other words, you're still. These still waters reflect. They reflect insight, they reflect wisdom, they reflect the potential downsides or potential upsides. We're gonna get into those in a little bit, risk management. Whereas conversely, let's say you live through emotion, I would look at that akin to a bunch of waves and ripples in the water. You can't really see, it's murky. You don't understand the depth. You don't understand if it's dangerous. You don't understand the constituents of the water, etc. You can't extrapolate. You can't plan ahead when you are living in immediate emotions. So logic, faith, and composure finally crystallize and materialize into patience, of course. And realizing realizing that the importance of patience, I think, is accurately encapsulated in a story by Russell Herman Conwell. He wrote this story, Acres of Diamonds. And it's a short story. I don't remember if it was fictional or non-fictional, but the principle is still holds merit. It's about this farmer, and he heard a bunch of stories about people making millions of dollars from mining diamonds in their rough state. Okay, so he heard of this, and he got really excited. He says, I want to ride this momentum. I want to hop on the wave. I want to go travel and find diamonds in the rough state. So what does he do? He sells his farm. And the twist of the whole story is that somebody bought his farm for basically nothing. And lo and behold, his original farm that he sold was one of the biggest natural diamond mines in history. For the metaphor here is he didn't understand what diamonds look like in their rough state before they were cut and polished and fabricated, etc. So he didn't understand what the diamonds look like. And I think this metaphor here is the diamonds are opportunity. So opportunity exists in the mind. If you have somebody who makes decisions off of logic, who has faith, who has composure, has patience, you can put them in any scenario. You can put them in any upbringing. You can put them in virtually any circumstances. They will always find opportunities there because, again, opportunity exists in the mind. It is not what you look at in the world. It is rather what you see that is of supreme importance. And another, I guess, imagery of symbolism here that can encapsulate this point is going back to this Acres of Diamonds. He was trying to act as if the grass was greener on the other side. That's a very common cliche. And I think this is wrong. I think the grass is greener where you cultivate it. The grass is greener where it is watered. The grass is greener where it is taken care of properly, where it is harvested, where it is watered. And that is right in front of you. So all of us have these acres of diamonds. We are all sitting on these acres of diamonds. And if we have enough patience, if we realize these opportunities can look different in rough state, they might be hidden in daily monotony, we can have patience and we realize that thoughts are seeds. And we might not get everything overnight, of course. Again, success is not linear. We are going to come across failure. We're going to get knocked off course. But what is important is that we recalibrate, take this feedback into our coordinating mechanism, and correct course, just like an airplane does, just like we do in golf. So that summarizes, I think, the chasm between the first frog and the second frog. So the first frog, I think, like I said, living through logic, you have faith, you have composure, and you finally have patience. I think this is a very constructive and conducive way to live if we want to live meaningful and fulfilled and successful lives. Conversely, if we live through emotions, I think this is a lot of short-term thinking. We are focused on immediate gratification. We are trying to please our desires in terms of what we want right now at the expense of what we want most in life. So we realize that we are choosing to indulge in the pain of regret rather than the pain of discipline. So either way in life, we are going to suffer. We are going to pay the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. You have to, in other words, you have to sacrifice now or later. If we're living through emotions, immediate gratification, we are sacrificing our potential future for gratification right now. And usually that gratification is fleeting. It's not fulfilling. It's not satiating because it's very transitory. It's here and then it's gone, and then you have to focus on the next thing. So this sporadic decision-making process, I think, will eventually inspire fear. And this fear is partly stemmed off the realization that nothing truly is, everything is becoming. What I mean by that is I've had a mentor tell me, it's one of my favorite lines I've ever heard. He said to me, if you ever hear somebody say, I don't want to change, I don't want to go outside of my comfort zone, I don't want to stretch because I like things just the way they are. Okay, if you ever heard somebody say that, or if you said it yourself, that is an expression of ignorance. Now, what it's an expression of ignorance of is a basic fundamental law that governs our reality, and that is the law of change, the law of constant change. Again, everything is becoming. Everything is simply progressing or regressing. There was an entrepreneur named Mary Kay Ash. She actually founded the Mary Kay Cosmetics company. She has said a quote that says, every single individual you will ever meet in your life is one of two things. They are an engine for you, or they are an anchor for you. In other words, they propel you to new heights, to new summits. They push you forward in all of your results in your life, or they drag you down. They are dead weight. They're pulling you down into a life that you would eventually regret. And we might understand this on the surface level. Take this even further. Not only every single individual, I would argue every single decision, every single choice, every single consumption of information, every single opinion, every single TV show we watch, every single piece of music we hear, every single act, decision, choice, commitment that we engage in is getting us better results or getting us worse results. Now, we don't conceptualize this because we tend to live in the moment. We don't, but if you zoom out and you take a broad scope of an individual human life, you'll realize that, as Emerson says, the fruit pre-exists in the seed. It will manifest. We do reap what we sow. So if we live through emotions, we realize a profound sense of fear that everything is changing and that we might lose something that we hold dear. We might lose something like our health, like our relationship. It might wither away from neglect. We realize the transitory nature of reality, at least incrementally. And I think this inspires fear. And what fear does is it manifests as worry. And what worry is a negative use and a misuse of creative imagination. In other words, it is saying, what if, insert negative scenario here, okay? What if this happens? What if I don't get that? What if I fail? What if this person betrays me? What if this happens? It's a state of contraction, and it manifests from fear. And I think this is extremely detrimental. And again, it's a complete misuse of our greatest capacity as human beings. And our greatest capacity is what? Creative imagination. We can establish any ideal in our mind, any future circumstance, and we can work toward that and we can manifest that. And worry is the complete polarization of this creative capacity, is a complete jettisoning of our creative potential. And we use it in a detrimental way. And again, we reap what we sow eventually. So if we live through emotions, fear, and worry, this leads to fluctuation in our actions, in our principles, in our philosophies, in our decision-making processes. And I brought this up a little bit earlier. This is manifested through the grass is greener on the other side syndrome. You're running from opportunity to opportunity to opportunity. You are trying to catch the newest wave of momentum and potential to profit and exploit it. But it's the equivalent of uprooting a plant every day to put it in better soil. It's going to die. It's not going to, it can't get you, you're not giving enough time to get roots and flourish exactly where it is. And everything can flourish exactly where it is. I mean, the way out of any circumstances is through the circumstances that are in front of people. So this fluctuation, how it manifests is being extremely focused on the problems. It's being problem-oriented versus solution-oriented. So going back to the story for one quick second, the second frog, the one living through emotion, he was problem-oriented. He was saying, oh my God, I'm hot, we're sweating, we need damp places, I'm worrying, I'm in fear, I'm in panic. What if we don't find a place to live? What if we dry up and die? What if we die of thirst? What if we die of this heat wave? What if we don't find shelter from the predators in the environment? What if? It was continually fluctuating. It was only focused on the problem. And conversely, if you were thinking through logic, faith, composure, and patience, you would be solution-oriented. The first frog said, wait a second. This is not the most conducive choice to our goals here. Let's actually think this through. Let's focus on a solution rather than amplify the problem and be wrapped up in fear and doubt and worry. So it's the equivalent of addressing symptoms rather than addressing a cause. So that summarizes and recapitulates the both frogs. And I want to further give emphasis on one more ideal before we move into application. It's going to be really short. And that is what they primarily look for, what these two frogs look for in life, because it might be a little bit ambiguous to say, yes, make your decisions through logic, have faith, have composure, have patience, or don't, live through emotions, fear, worry, and fluctuation. That might be kind of ambiguous and equivocal to say. And I think an easier way to ingrain this in our memory is to think of what these two individuals focus on, or what are they seeking out of life, okay? The first frog, logic, faith, composure, and patience. This frog is seeking adventure, okay? It is expansion. It is seeking experience. It is seeking fulfillment of meaning, of trying to accrue and adapt and accumulate all the wisdom, all the information, all of the insight that it possibly can. And obviously, this comes with risk. For if you are to profit from something, usually the risk is equal to the reward. So the further you venture outside of your comfort zone, the more rewarding and fulfilling and meaningful circumstances, people, conversations, experiences you will tend to have in life. And this is if you are seeking adventure. You are getting something from life. You are the hero in the hero's journey, going out of your walled city, going out of your comfort zone, slaying the dragon, getting something from this journey, returning as greater than what you were before. Conversely, the second frog is looking for and seeking security. It is contracting. It is getting smaller. It is vulnerable. It is staying in the confines of safety. It is staying in the confines of its comfort zone. This individual lives vicariously through other people, and this can manifest in multiple modalities. This can manifest in escapism. For example, instead of slaying a metaphorical dragon in our own life, we might be wrapped up and encapsulated and enamored with movies or video games or something, for example, that will mimic or simulate this experience of the hero's journey of slaying the dragon and getting something and becoming greater and having valor and heroic attributes. We will become encompassed by these and enamored with it, and that leads to escapism and kind of being detached with life. And the second person gets through life rather than getting from life. It just mindlessly goes through this journey. So that encapsulates the two ideals that I wanted to talk about. And finally, how to apply this. Some things that I want to leave here that are open for discussion are some ways we can apply this. So first is risk management. And this is encapsulated in the story of when the first frog said, wait a second, we have a potential risk here. If we do this, this might happen. He's thinking logically, he's calm. I think the most effective decisions are made when we are completely calm. Again, only still waters reflect. Before we mindlessly and blindly go into something, we should know the potential downfall. We should know the potential risk and reward. Obviously, the ratio should be in the positive there, so the reward should be greater than the risk. Obviously, if you can quantify it and metricize it, good. Obviously, in things like money or finances, you can, but other social issues you might not be able to, but at least try to conceptualize some level of, I'm going to have a higher risk versus reward. So that's one, like thinking things through, like what can go wrong? Am I risking too much in the line to only gain this little bit? It's not worth the risk. That's an intelligent principle to have. Second, I have equanimity. And that is kind of the state of being like mentally or emotionally, I don't want to say stagnant. I don't know what a better word would be for stagnant, but it's kind of having like a baseline of your emotions, not allowing yourself to get too low in terms of like rage or being frustrated or being upset or being emotional, or rather too high or being euphoric or being too enthusiastic, too out of control. And for a while, I actually heard a fellow member from a meetup give a presentation on equanimity. For a while, I understood not engaging in the negative ones. I understand not getting overwhelmed or frustrated or angry or throwing a mental tantrum, temper tantrum or something like this. I understand that. But I never understood the limiting and governing of the positive attributes. I never understood the utility in that. I said, no, life should be experienced. Life should be loved. It is sacred. It should be, you should capitalize on these moments. And I think you should, but when we are dealing with things that require us to manage our risk, we should not allow ourselves to get too wildly caught up. I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you are, let's say something with finances. Let's say, I don't want to say gambling because that's not really sure. Maybe trading or something like this. Or gambling can work actually too. But let's say gambling, okay? You're having a good time. Your motive is to make money playing blackjack or poker, whatever you play. And okay, you're up in profits and you get emotional over this. You allow yourself to become euphoric over your wins. And then what might happen, you might get overconfident, you might overestimate your abilities or underestimate the statistical probabilities here, the variables, the arithmetic going on. You might just completely ignore that. You don't have that in your mind because you're riding this enthusiasm wave. And then you might be a little bit more risky with your income, and you might put all your profits down, and next thing happens, guess what? You lost your profits, and then you lost some principal involved too, and then your emotion goes all the way back down and reverberates back from the bottom. So that could be a good example of kind of governing this, having a limit of this upper limit of enthusiasm, governing your positive emotions, kind of being level-headed, if you will. And third, finally, I think is to reverse worry at its root, when we start to see it manifest. And worry manifests in the phrase, what if again, imagined negative scenario. What if this happens? What if I fail? What if this doesn't happen? You can just as easily flip it and say, what if I succeed? What if I get the result I was looking for with this? And the easy way to do this, again, going back to the example, we know that worry manifests from fear. Fear can be mitigated by simply immediately polarizing the idea to feed your faith. For both faith and fear are very similar in the sense that they demand that you believe in something that is not real. Okay, let me repeat that. Both faith and fear demand you to believe in something that is not yet real. So they are identical in that regard. And imagination, again, our greatest capacity as humans, can be expressed through one of these methods. We can constructively visualize and imagine. Again, that would be faith, or we can destructively imagine and conceptualize, and that would be fear. So that encapsulates these two frogs. Again, I don't know what it is with frogs. It's the second Aesop's fable I've done with frogs. But I will now pass it on to Shrikant. We do have a few questions for the breakout group. So I will let him take it from here.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. So it's time for questions. We've got 4 rules that we've used for 4 years. Rule number 1. John, I'm going to mute you for a second so that there is no, give me just a second here. Okay. So we got 4 rules. First, raise your hand when you want to speak. You can make a comment or ask a question. You can do that by typing your question, or by typing exclamation mark, or by raising your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to disagree with anything, but please be courteous. All right, so that's it. So it's going to be Joe, then Wayne, and then Jen next. Go ahead and unmute yourself, ask your question, and then mute yourself back. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, John. Thank you again for presenting this evening. It was an awesome presentation. Just a quick question. You spoke about managing risk, and would that include a self-awareness of one's triggers? And then what would it be to manage that? What are some recommendations that you have to manage that risk and ensure your feedback loop, the fidelity of the data in your feedback loop, so that you ensure that you're actually improving?
What did you mean specifically? Can you elaborate a little bit more on triggers?
Sure. I mean, if you mentioned one would be gambling or drinking or something along those lines, so how would you, I mean, there are very clear ones where you know if you're doing it wrong, but let's think about how you may react in a work situation. And, sometimes you have a regret about it because, you reacted impulsively. But, so how do you ensure that feedback loop is so that you can analyze, you don't want to, be too paralyzed by fear, but at the same time, how do you ensure, what are some steps that you can take to make sure you're addressing some of your impulses?
It's a really good question. So firstly, I think there is a degree, I mean, this can't go unmentioned. There is a temperamental proclivity that comes into play with variables here on how easy it is for some individuals to make the majority of their decisions based on logic versus emotion. There definitely is a temperamental proclivity. I think I'm biased in the sense of my cognitive functions in terms of favoring the first frog in terms of logic, faith, composure, patience, etc., risk management, looking at things in terms of numbers. But with all that said, I do think that is very important. It is very idiosyncratic, but also getting as objective as we can with our goals, with our data, with, again, our risk and reward. So if the risk is too large, maybe for the particular goal that we're looking for, maybe compartmentalize that goal. So obviously we know that every big goal can be broken onto a series of small goals and then even more compartmentalized into daily tasks, right? So I think there would be you'd be hard pressed to find something that would be too risky to do within the confines of like a daily to-do list. Maybe in terms of like 10 years, like, maybe in terms of 5 years, you want to quit your job, you want to work for yourself, you want to start your business, you want to buy a home. Like, these are all big things. You can argue risky, but you can say, okay, save enough money, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. If you break them down, I think the risk is largely mitigated in that sense. And in terms of things that aren't quantifiable, I think if you're in terms of like what you brought up, work, if you in terms of dealing with other people, having like objective, clear conversation with them, exemplifying and trying to determine your needs, your desires, your expectations of that relationship, what they want from you, what you want from them, vice versa, what their expectations are in the relationship or the project or the management or whatever the task is at hand. And then moving forward from there. But I think that's a good way to start, at least, is like breaking down these goals that could be fearful, or they could elicit worry and fluctuation or being overwhelmed. I think just breaking them down to smaller iotas, and then tracking. Obviously, everybody's heard me say this dozens of times. I'm such an avid fan of tracking.
Next question is from Wayne. Wayne, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, John? Thanks for the presentation. I am trying to, I guess, reconcile this framework with my understanding of some of the psychological literature that you cannot make any judgment without the emotional faculties. And so is it a fair summary that within your model, emotion is really short-term decision-making and logic is long-term decision-making? But it's still the case that with long-term decision-making, you have to make a value judgment, and therefore you're using some bit of emotion, right? It's not like there's a separation. You go into like the whole emotionless Vulcan mode. You still are human. It's just the like type of decision-making or the scope of the decision-making that changes. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely, you are absolutely correct. I only like exaggerated these two frogs as merely an illustrative example to kind of bring home these really 2 points. But that is an important point that you did bring up. It is short-term desires, short-term thinking over long-term thinking. I think the first frog would be the logic, faith, composure, patience, etc. Patience, that's in the name itself. That is long-term thinking, long-term decision making. And again, like I said in the beginning, I don't want to polarize this. I don't want to like say people who make decisions off emotions are wild and erratic and sporadic. And I don't want to turn people that think logically into robots, of course, too. There is absolutely a mix of both. You can argue that the first frog's decision to say, no, let's not jump in there, because that was an emotional judgment, as you said, a value judgment on that state would be less desirable than this future state. And that less desirable means an emotion. So you are right, yeah. But I think that's that might be a better way for you to reconcile it, is to like superimpose short-term thinking and long-term thinking over these two modes of the frogs.
Okay, next question is from Jen. Jen, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. John, thank you for your discussion point. I think it's very interesting. My question, I think, is following up on the previous two questions, in that, does it have to be an either or, whether you're acting on emotion versus reason? Can an emotional response not be perceived as, for example, fear, anxiety, and anger, not be perceived as something negative, but actually something that one can derive strength from in making such decisions? I think there is this classical assumption from Descartes, Kant, that we need to suppress emotions in order to think more reasonably. But that's not always true, in that there should always be this balance between an emotional response and a logical response, because you need emotions in order to make value judgments. You're not acting on a world absent of that. And so every decision that you make impacts other people who are acting on emotional responses as well. I think I'll cut right there.
Yeah, I do agree with you. And this is similar to the last question. I don't want to posit this, that I'm recommending the complete jettisoning of emotional judgments or emotional desires or even emotional decisions, because like I said, even the examples that I use in the first three attributes of faith, composure, and patience, those can be emotionally gratifying states, right? Having faith in something and realizing your progress, realizing your trajectory toward this ideal, that is emotionally gratifying, right? I think it's more so of like putting off your immediate gratification for like having our emotional desires met right now, like with a transitory, like fleeting sense of like surface level dopamine. You also look at this versus like dopamine and serotonin. We know that dopamine hits, I think it's only 5 centers of the brain, and serotonin hits 14. And it's also processed in the gut. It's an experience. It's not really an emotion, like fleeting, like joy. It's rather like contentment and fulfillment as opposed to like excitement. And dopamine is like, obviously we all know the difference between the two. And I think that can be an example of these two frogs as well. So the second frog, living immediately, it's only having these short chains of dopamine cycles keeping you up, keeping you going. And these results are not going to be consistent. They're not going to be conducive. We might not get anything done because I think this manifests to like the grass is greener syndrome, looking at this new shiny opportunity, looking at this thing that's going to bring us the most emotional gratification right now. Whereas sometimes it can be very valuable to delay that gratification to have a greater emotional satisfaction in the future.
Okay, next question is from Wayne. Wayne, go ahead. If anybody else has a question, you can just line up by raising your hand in Zoom or typing in exclamation mark. Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going back to the time instance and some of the things that Jen just mentioned. Like, is it possible to know upfront before the result is played out whether you've used emotional logic? There seems to be an aspect of regret in determining whether or not you acted on emotional logic, but you don't know how your decisions are going to match with the environment. And so what you may be thinking, while you may be thinking that you're using logic, maybe you're wrong. Maybe you didn't have all the information. Maybe you were actually upset when you thought that you were acting rationally. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there. Like,
Okay.
How do you actually know if you're being logical?
That is a very good point. And I think to return back to the story, you can argue the second frog, which is the bad frog, let's call it, you can argue that was a logical choice given his circumstances and given if you look at things through a smaller temporal duration, if you look at things immediately, I think you can say, yeah, that was a logical choice. But if you zoom out and you look at things through a larger temporal scope, that was irrational. That was emotional because if you go back to the story, they just, the marsh just dried up and they just left to another place. Okay. That was almost an immediate decision. Okay. He said, okay, I just left my home. I'm uncertain. I'm unsafe. I don't feel, the sense of peace and well-being that I need to have met right now. Therefore, I'm going to look for the first wet thing that I see. I'm going to jump in it. Okay. Now, short term, like in terms of like 2 minutes, that can be a rational decision. But long term, obviously the second frog, long term being even 1 day in this scenario, the second frog said, wait, no, what if we get stuck in there? So if you zoom in and you micromanage and you look at this small iota of this second frog's decision onto like, I want my needs met right now. I need water, I need moisture, I need my needs met. I'm going to do that right now. Whereas thinking in terms of like, okay, if I do this, I should be this, what happens after, what happens after? Obviously you're right. You're never going to have all the data. Of course not. But I think it's important to the fable, the summary right here, think twice before you act. If it is not immediately, if it's not time sensitive, and it doesn't sound like it was because the first frog wasn't necessarily worried in this situation. Now, if it's time sensitive, that's a whole different topic. But most of our decisions aren't. Most of our decisions aren't. Okay, we have all the time in the world to reflect, but we neglect on this. We try. I think we act like this short frog, the second frog, and we think very short term. We think of, okay, what am I feeling? What emotions do I need gratified? I need a release of dopamine right now. I need to do something that's immediately gratifying. I need to eat some candy. I need to eat junk food. I need to play a video game. I need to watch a movie. I need to do this because I need that hit right now. Whereas if I like, okay, I'm going to go through a little bit of suffering. I'm going to go through a little bit of delayed gratification so I can experience serotonin and fulfillment and joy and pride. and justification of all my turmoil in the end. And I think that's a good way to judge if we are making decisions based off of mainly emotion or mainly logic, is the scope, is the time frame.
All right. So now we're going to go to breakout rooms. Great presentation, John. So now we're going to go to breakout rooms, and we're going to ask ourselves 3 questions. So there are going to be discussion leaders in each of the rooms, moderators who will be leading the questions. Give me just a second. Who will be leading, asking people these questions. These questions are there on the meetup page, so you can find them there. The moderators are going to be Jeff, John, Sean, and Joe this time. So the questions, first question, do you mainly make decisions impulsively or slowly? What inspires or encourages the decisions on each side of this spectrum? That's the first question. The second question, can we justify impulsive decisions that were made to capitalize on a window of opportunity? Third question, what are some ways to ensure we don't overthink before acting and fall into stagnation? So those are the 3 questions. So I'm opening up the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will last for 30 minutes, and then we'll come back into the main room to share our takeaways. All right, so I'm opening the breakout rooms now.